Tell Me a Story is a memoir written by award-winning and best-selling author Cassandra King Conroy. In the book, she talks about her 18-year marriage to notable author Pat Conroy. Today, I talk one-on-one with Cassandra for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Cassandra King Conroy, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. You need no introduction. Obviously, you are a well-known, award-winning, and best-selling novelist whose fiction has been won the hearts of readers everywhere, including here in the South. And I know because Polly Buxton gave me this great book of yours that I just read over the weekend. I'm still reading, actually. And, obviously it's called Tell Me a Story. From the time that you published this book to right now, Ms. Conroy, who are you as an author and as a person?
From the time I first started publishing, I think I've learned a lot, if nothing else. I guess I'd like to say I'm still the same person, but as an author, I've come a long way because this journey started late for me in midlife. Well, I had always been writing. I wanted to be a writer since I was a little girl. That was all I ever wanted to do. But it took me a while to have any, real confidence, I guess, in myself to think that I could ever get anything published. And I mean, I sort of didn't even think about it. As much as I love to read, it just seemed so far out of reach that, gosh, I was maybe at 40 before I ever sent something off for publication. And actually, the first thing I ever had published and got paid for was a poem, which is ironic. I've not written a poem since. It was a terrible poem. They had to have been desperate to have accepted it for this anthology. But then once I got started, once I got the bug, I couldn't stop. I've been writing ever since. I have written 5 novels and 2 books of nonfiction, and I write a good many magazine articles, written for Southern Living and Coastal Living, some of those kind of magazines. Now I found that I really enjoy those. I enjoy having to sort of condense what you want to say because they have very strict word limits. And it's almost, Quintin, it's sort of like I'd highly recommend it to other writers because it's almost like doing a puzzle. Because if you have a 500 word, which I did when I wrote essays for the back page of the Coastal Living, I don't remember the exact word count, but let's just say 500. So it was really an exercise, a fun kind of exercise. I would count and I'd have 5, say. Go back over and find 5 words. I wish I'd done this with my students when I was teaching, that you can say that in a different way, so you learn how to be more precise and concise with what you're saying. So turned out to really enjoy that.
What is the power of storytelling these days?
I'm glad you asked me about that because I've some of my talks that I do about my book, having called it "Tell Me a Story" intentionally because that was, to me, summed up so much about Pat. But I talk a lot about the power of storytelling, and you said a couple of important words there. You said these days because we're haven't had this particular situation and thankfully, praise God, for a long, long time. But there's a war going on, in another part of the world, a heartbreaking thing. And what draws us in so much is the stories coming out of the people who are enduring this kind of thing. And so it makes storytelling to me more important than ever, in that we hear that these things, quote, don't, we think don't affect us directly. I mean, they affect our pocketbooks when you go have to fill up with gas, and you're paying twice or three times what you pay before the sanctions. So, we can get disgruntled. We can say, this, that, and the other. But you hear these powerful stories of the suffering of others, and suddenly it's your story too. Suddenly you're empathizing with situations that don't directly affect us.
What would be that title of your story about, say, for instance, Ukraine?
Oh, wow. I'd almost want to say, we didn't ask for this, something to that effect. What I think so much about Quintin, I was working out. I've got a little herb garden. I am not much of a gardener, but it was a beautiful sunny day one day last week. I was out in that little herb garden, and it was just, I was soaking up the sun, breathing in the scent of the herbs, and just thanking God for the beauty and being able to work. And I promise you, this is story. It just, out of the blue, it just came to me. There's so many people in Ukraine who cannot be doing this. They couldn't be out, in their gardens and so forth. And so, I think these were people just like us. These are the Ukrainians are just like us. They just want to live their lives in peace. They want to do their gardening, go to their children's soccer games, this sort of stuff. All these things suddenly have totally disappeared for them in a very traumatic and violent way. And it is, I don't know, maybe a heartbreaking story would be more appropriate for a title.
And Ms. Conroy, I was just thinking this too. If your husband were alive today, how would he tell that story in the Pat Conroy way?
Oh, well, it would certainly be complicated. It would be this thick, have many pages, many subplots and so forth. But he would definitely be, put his unique twist, because Pat, of course, wrote so much. He was most known for writing about dysfunctional families, and he actually inadvertently coined a new word. Some reporter told him this. He didn't know this before, but got a call, said, I've described this situation as Conroy-esque.
Yes.
And of course, meaning you have all the family dysfunction in that situation that Pat was known for. But so I think because of that emphasis on his work, that being the sort of the major theme of his work, some of the subplots got more overlooked, have been more overlooked over the years. For example, at the beautiful story and tragic story that has yet to be told from the Prince of Tides is Luke, the brother who was killed and defending an island. It's a whole environmental story, and he also in that tells the story of. All right, I'm not a native South Carolinian, and I can't remember the name of the little town, but the town that was displaced totally by the Savannah River, the nuclear plant is what Pat always called it. I don't even know what they do there because I'm always afraid to, the sign said don't slow down, don't stop.
Yeah.
So when I go through that area, I don't. But he wrote some about that was another one of the subplots, and in Beach Music, he certainly did. Went into the Holocaust, and some background for some characters that displaced characters who eventually settled in Beaufort and went back and told about some of the atrocities and so forth that had them displaced from their homeland. So he dealt with those kinds of subjects.
Right.
I promise you that if he were writing a book today, he would have, he would have a Ukrainian, family maybe, and Russian family, whatever. So yes,
that's amazing. And you talk about Pat Conroy. Obviously, he died from pancreatic cancer in 2016.
Yes.
Who is Cassandra King Conroy right now?
Well, I feel like I'm certainly a different person than then without Pat in my life. He did bring so much to my life, to my daily life. We had we were both, we met. We were in our 50s, so we spent, and I'm still spending, except without him, the latter part of our, years together. And he was such a Quintin. He was a wonderful man and so much fun, which doesn't seem to go with his persona. Because I've had people say, "Oh my goodness, you live with him, and he's so dark and tormented and this sort of thing." And he certainly did, and freely wrote about fighting depression his whole life. But he had such a sense of humor, and he dealt with life and the turmoils and so forth of life so much with his humor. So when you read his books, you can be laughing on one page and crying, on the next. And so it was 6 years last month since he died, and it seems like 6 months ago or whatever. But I certainly miss him. I miss him more every day. I am trying to, not very successfully at this point, I'm afraid to say, but he did make me promise. It was kind of a deathbed promise that I would get back to my writing, because it can be so therapeutic, and also it's just who I am and what I do. And so I think about that a lot when I'm, thinking, I don't know about this new book, it's dragging. I haven't got it going and what, and it's almost like Pat's still with me, because I can hear him say, just work through that and go on, and then you can go back and look, just things, those kinds of things that I miss every day.
Every day. How did you bring his persona out and tell me a story?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question too, because I knew that was going to be difficult. I think Pat was a very unique person with certainly he's had such a larger than life personality, which is so many people say that about him, but it's so obvious. One thing was he was a big man, anyway, and had that same large full of life personality. And so I knew that was going to be difficult to capture in this book, but I wanted readers to have more of a sense of it. And I was also afraid, I wanted to do him justice as well. And with all his I talked about his sense of humor and how he dealt with things. he dealt with people that same way. He could joke around with folks and diffuse a situation in a way I wouldn't dream of trying. And he always he was such a people person. He never met a stranger. If he met you're supposed to be interviewing him. Before this is over, he would be interviewing you. He would ask you where you're from, what your interests are. Tell me about your family, all this sort of stuff. And before you know it, you would find the roles reversed. Quintin, I saw it so many times. I saw it on national TV and stuff like this. He would have these people telling about him. So yeah, that was a struggle to try to present him to the readers, and in a way that I knew him, and to do him justice. But also, it was important to me to be honest. To not. We have a tendency, when we lose people, then we sort of, and I think that's a wonderful thing. That we want to remember the good and so forth. That's a blessing in so many ways, and a good way to honor the memory of someone. But if you're writing, a memoir, if it's not honest, there's no point in writing. Because that should be fiction. But in a memoir, I think you want to really try to deal with things as they were, as you experience them, which is all a memoirist can do. Is I couldn't tell anyone else's story in this. It had to be the story of my relationship with Pat. So I wanted to talk about some of his troubles, as well as the loving, wonderful aspects of our relationship, and so I had to try to deal with that as well. But it was a difficult task.
Well, what part of the book you wanted to include things about, obviously his troubles that you wanted to be honest with, but you also wanted to hold back from telling?
I think that may always be true. This is the first time I've written a memoir of any kind, and personal stuff. So I found myself being a little bit more honest about Pat than about myself. And after her first reading of my manuscript, my editor called me, and she said, I feel like I know a lot more about Pat Conroy from reading this book. Then she said, but I still don't know as much about you as I'd like to know. And I thought, don't tell me I got to write about myself. No. I mean, there are things I haven't told anyone. And besides, I'm not that, I'm not one of these people that go around telling everything. Pat teased me about this, that I was not very forthcoming with, my private thoughts and personal, problems and this sort of stuff. So I felt like for the manuscript to be accepted, I mean, she really said, no, I want you to go in more depth on some of your, feelings and so forth. Tell us more about that. And so that was a different task altogether, and it's not much fun. It was therapeutic in a lot of ways for me to and cathartic, in retelling a story. I certainly, when I set out to write the book, I didn't intend for it to be a memoir. I was, of course, as you do when you lose someone, thinking back over so much of, different times, the trips, the memories, and these sort of things, and was more trying to capture some of those. And the book just sort of came to me in a way that because my thing is, when I do, writers' workshops or something like that, and I'm asked how you find stories to write about. I used to tell students, I don't believe we find stories. I think they find us, and they find us when we're ready to tell them, or when we feel the need that this is a story that needs to be told. So that was kind of how it how it came about. I was just in the grieving process, because I started this book very soon after Pat died, and it was I was telling our story.
Okay, is the memoir really a mesmerizing and captivating love story of you and Pat?
Well, I can't modestly answer that. Yes, I do. I'm not sure how captivating it is, but it is. It definitely is our love story. I wanted to start it when Pat and I met, and at the points that we were in our lives at then, and both of us having gone through a divorce at that time, and not certainly not looking to get involved with anyone else, or that sort of thing. At that time in our lives, it was almost with me that was the last thing I wanted. I had finally gotten to a point where I was on my own, and I had not been for such a long time, and after having feeling fairly constricted in my previous marriage, so that I was at a good place, so. And I also think that maybe love is somewhat like stories as well. It finds us. I don't know. I've had friends that say things like, "Well, I have looked online. I've gone to these dating sites and this sort of stuff, and there's just no good men out there anymore. I'm just going to give up." Well, usually that's when it happens. That's when you'll meet someone, or I think it has to, in some ways, has to be unexpected.
Yeah, and in the book I was reading, Pat. Well, you actually ran into Pat at a function, and you actually thought, well, someone told you that he left, but in fact he stayed behind because it's.
Well, Quintin, it's funny because I have thought about that before, and thought, how would it have been? How would our meeting have been had I known he was Pat? Because I would have probably been so starstruck, because I was a great admirer of his work,
Right.
and so for any listeners who haven't read the book, when we first met, it was at a writers' conference, but I was told that Pat was not there, and so I started this conversation with this gentleman that I didn't know was Pat. And then a friend comes up and said, "So I see you met Pat Conroy," and my first reaction, but no, this is not Pat Conroy, because he's gone. I've been told that he had to leave. And so, yeah, I've thought about that. I thought, well, what if I had met him and we had started chatting, just, like two, quote, normal people, if I had thought he was someone, because at that point when we met in '95, he was really at the height of his the pinnacle, so many ways, of a career that very few writers need. He had had huge success with The Prince of Tides. The movie had come out only a couple years previously. He had gotten Oscar nominations but I mean, I'd never known anyone who'd had an Oscar nomination. This or big, blockbuster movie made from their book or anything like that. So I most likely I would have been so starstruck I would have just said, "Mr. Conroy, could I have your autograph?" Yeah, put a book in front of me and ran. So,
And speaking of which, your I believe your agent wanted you to basically talk to him about your book, but you were reluctant to talk about your book, but you wanted to talk about food.
well, yeah, my first novel was coming out when I met Pat. As a matter of fact, at the writers' conference, it was supposed to have been out, and since it was put out by a small press, it was not ready. So yes, my publisher then, after I had met Pat, really wanted, of course, like everybody else, wanted something from Pat. And maybe that was it too, that I never would have read, I don't know how many things, that she met Pat Conroy when she asked him for a blurb for her first book. Oh, no. I never would have had nerve to ask him for a blurb. But someone there at the park told him that my first novel was coming out, and he asked about wanted to read it and said he would give me a blurb if he liked it, to have the way he said it was to have my publisher send it to him, and if he liked it, he'd give me a blurb for it. If not, he'd just pretend it got lost in the mail, that he never got it, which is fair enough to me.
Right. That is amazing. But he did eventually call you, and he was surprised that you were using certain words in the book, and you were only one of the few writers who were able to tell that in that sense.
Yeah, Pat always said that, and I didn't believe him. The other thing, he's 100% Irishman, so I used to tell him all the time he was so full of blarney. He would always say things like this, like, "Oh, please, don't believe it." But he claimed that he had tried to write in different voices before.
Right.
And he hadn't had any success with that. He had to focus on his main character and let the voice of the book be carried by his main character. I think Pat would have been fantastic at writing different voices. I would have, I can just imagine, say, The Prince of Tides told through each of the different characters' voices and there, and so forth. But no, he said that just didn't work for him, and I've written most of my books using different voices, and it's just my favorite way to write. I do try. I think I've only written one book that I didn't, because I've tried. I think, come on, try something else. You don't have to do it this way. But Quintin, it's so fascinating to me. And it's the essence of storytelling for all of us, I think, when we think about there can be one story, and everybody has their different points of views on what the story means. And, of course, we hear this all the time in the news and whatever, and that's why we have opinion pages and conflicting, opinions on what happened and how it happened. So in my first book, that was kind of, the whole thing is, I'd heard about this accident in a small town between these two young men, and I just was thinking of the different ways it affected all these, people's lives, even some that weren't directly involved in this, and their different perspectives on what actually happened. And I don't know, I just find that fascinating. But yeah, that was Pat. First phone call I think I got from him. I think it was, or the second, remember. But he that was what he was calling about. He said, "How do you do these different voices?" I just have never been able to do that. So we talked about point of view a lot, but Pat would not. He did not like to talk about his work. And I know since this is Charleston, a lot more people here have heard him speak or met him, because when the book came out and I would go around and talk about the book, most every place I went, that would be the first thing I'd ask. How many of you, ever met Pat or heard him talk, even if you didn't meet him, maybe went, heard him give a speech. And I was surprised, at some of the places one I remember in particular, I don't know why, but it just comes to mind, is I spoke to a fairly large group in Miami. And I know Pat had visited Miami and spoken there several times before. There's not a single person in the room of maybe 150 people who had heard him talk before. But one thing he never read from his work. And he didn't talk about the book, of whatever book he was, or he didn't in his talk. Now he would usually be asked questions about it, but he would talk a lot. And people would laugh and say, "I've heard him speak before. Went back to hear him again." Even though I'd heard him before, he told the very same stories, the very same, he would vary somewhat, but he just mostly just told stories of his life,
Right.
and that was his talk. An interesting approach to it. But you really had trouble pinpointing him and getting him to talk about his work, and he would just blow it off. He wouldn't talk much about it. And he did. I have heard him say before that once he wrote a book, he that was behind him then. And all his energy and focus had to be on his next book, which makes sense. But he didn't go back and reread. He wouldn't. You know what? I could never do this. I really admired his constraint. He would not watch the movies. I wanted him so badly. Now he had to see the movies when they came out. He always went to the premiere and stuff like that. So he could certainly. Someone asked, what he thought about so-and-so's performance or something like that. He had seen the movie. But like Hallmark did a remake of The Water's Wide. And the young man that it was typecasting, because the young man they got to play Pat looked I didn't know Pat at that age. But he looked so much like the pictures of Pat at that age that I kept putting it. They sent us a DVD back when people, back in the old days, 15 years ago, however long it was, when that's how you watched movies and stuff, mainly on your TV. I would try to trick him. I would put it in because I wanted him to see this guy,
right? Yes.
And I wanted him to say, "Hey, this looks like your pictures. Does this really look like? What do you think of this character?" He was even built like Pat. He was, broad-shouldered young man and so forth. And he would get up and walk out of the room. He said, and he would say, not in any kind of mean way. I don't mean that. He would just like, "Oh, boy, I just can't. I can't do it." I would be glued to it.
Right.
I'd be glued to it, see if they got it right.
Yes. Really there. And how do you go back and reread Tell Me a Story?
Oh boy, I don't. do sort of have in common with Pat is that, it's really hard to go back. I admire anyone who can do it because um, I think I wouldn't be surprised if this wasn't something most writers do. You do it through clenched teeth, and you go, "Oh, did I actually say that?" Or, "Oh man, how did the editor not catch? That's obviously." Oh, that hurts. I wish I'd edited that more. I did have a chance. My first novel was re-released. I think it was about 5 years after it originally came out. It was purchased by the company that I was publishing with at the time and re-released. So I had to redo it. Well, I didn't redo it. I don't mean redo it that way.
Right.
But this was the chance if I was going to that they won't change the plot or anything like that. But little details, just like sometimes I'm not sure everyone knows this. I certainly didn't. But if just say you made a couple of the copy editor missed or something like that, a couple of errors in a hardcover, that can be corrected before it comes out in paperback. So it was sort of that kind of thing that I had to go, but I had to go back over it with a fine-tooth comb. And boy, I was the same way. I was like, oh, how did this thing ever get published? Oh, I should have rewritten this part and stuff like that. So, but that's to get to the specific question you asked me. I think with this book, it's different because things were fresh on my mind when I wrote it. Started writing on it, shortly after Pat's death. So it's more a record now, and that. So I could, if I wanted to remember, as I get older and older and more, forgetful and senile and all that sort of stuff. Remember, things about Pat. Now, let's see. When we went on, I had a travel diary, so I talked some about our travels. And when we went, this one was Egypt, I believe. But I just wanted to have. We went. I never traveled much before at all until I married Pat, and then had some wonderful travel adventures. But I am saving some of those for another book. But a cookbook, not another, not writing another memoir. Because when some of these travels, we would have these wonderful dishes, and we'd come home, we'd try to duplicate those, replicate them, I guess would be the word. So I'm saving some of these, but looking back on this book, it would be almost like finding a journal or something that you'd written in while things are fresh on your mind. And I know I've wondered maybe I wrote a little more about Pat's illness toward the end than I really intended to. Once I got into it. And I think it was that it was so fresh. It had just happened, and I'd go into a lot more detail about his illness. But one day, that's a record, maybe for his kids or whatever. What actually happened with how rapidly he got sick, and so that's all in there as well.
I read some of it. It's so sad to hear about all that and how it's happened so suddenly.
Yeah.
I know that the editor basically said in the beginning, "Hey, you told more about Pat than yourself." But what chapter in Tell Me a Story describes you?
Yeah, I do have a chapter in there. One thing I really wanted to tell is about the greatest gift anyone ever gave me. And that is when Pat had asked me, and back when we were dating, I hate that word at the time, because like I said, we were in our well, we met, Pat was turning 50 that year. I've written, and so I can't deny it now as a year older than Pat. I'd already had my 50th birthday. But, we met at that stage in our life. Uh, and so I was writing about, or he was asking me about where I wrote, because when he came to visit me where I was living, it was a little townhouse that I was renting.
Yeah.
That I was out on my own and so forth, but very small. And I sat on I had a futon for. I was also very poor. Teachers always are, trust me. And I was. I would sit there a lot of times, or out on a little back patio that I had to write. But he noted that I didn't have a writing space, and I said, "Well, after hours, I can use my office at the little college, community college where I was teaching." And so I did a lot of writing there because I used a computer. Pat always wrote by hand,
Yeah.
but so he said, "So what was your writing room like before? In your previous marriage?" I didn't have a writing room. Come on. A writing room? Are you kidding me? So so it's probably the chapter. I think I called it "A Room of My Own." Not very original. I stole from Virginia Woolf, but he wanted me. That was one thing he said. He was determined that I was going to have my own room for a writing room, and so I wrote about it in the book when I moved into Pat's house and married and so forth. He had me select one of the rooms. Well, there was only one really nice guest room. The other one didn't have any windows. I'm claustrophobic. I
Right.
couldn't have written a word in there,
Right.
I didn't even like going in that room to change the sheets and whatever after we had guests. We only put them there if we had an overflow. The nice guest room was a room upstairs. Well, that was pretty much my only choice. And but we doubled it as a guest room too when we had guests. So I guess that would be the chapter, because then I talked some about how I wrote my previous books and just my writing life, I guess, as well.
And so tell me a story, Cassandra. What was your writing space for that book?
Well, we had moved, and this house in the background in 2012. We moved into Beaufort. From the beginning of our marriage, we had been on Fripp Island, and I loved Fripp Island, and Pat did too. It's a perfect place for a writer. It's not so much a perfect place for a writer as one ages, because it's about 20 something miles. I've forgotten exactly from 22 or whatever, from Beaufort proper. But it goes by Hunting Island. It's the only road, the Highway 21 going out that way, going by Hunting Island and going through St. Helena Island. Ends on Fripp. And so if you're going to Hunting or Fripp in summertime, that road, it can be a nightmare. I mean, it is a tourist destination in a lot of ways, and so once, especially if Pat was having a lot of health problems at the time, and going into town to the doctor a lot, and it at one point he said that let's get a house in town, and so his hope was that we would keep the house on the Strip because we both loved it so much. But I will have to tell you, his financial person said, no, you can't do both. Pat, she didn't. He tried to anyway. But so we started looking here, and so to circle back around to your question, we found this house on Battery Creek.
Oh yes.
Out these windows here, beautiful view of Battery Creek that I write about something, and it's a larger house than what we have. It's way more spread out. Mm. So this time I was able to claim a room that it has doubled as because I have a day bed in there, and certainly I've put grandkids in there and things like that. But basically, it is my writing room. But to sort of bring this full circle, Quintin, I will have to tell you, I got to return the favor for Pat. The Lord did me a favor in a lot of ways in that Pat was out of town. Goodness, I've forgotten the book that came out when we moved in 2012, My Reading Life, maybe. Or his cookbook. I cannot remember exactly when we moved into Beaufort which book he was on tour for, but he was out of town when we moved in, which was wonderful because it would have driven him crazy. All the boxes and stuff, like setting everything up. That wasn't his thing. That would have driven him crazy. So fortunately, he was gone, and I got to surprise him. And when we had talked, looked at the house and talked about. Pat was a wonderful husband in that he didn't care what I did much. He was the opposite of a control freak. Right. Thankful. So I'd say, now this would make a wonderful little such and such. No, I don't care. Do whatever. And I had told him. Well, he knew that I had to have a desk made for him because the desk that he had on Fripp, it was huge desk. I don't know why he got it, but he did. How they got it in, I'll never know. But it wouldn't fit in the room here that I was going to fix up as his office. Right. But what I got to fix in another room. Pat was a book collector, and he loved his books. Oh, more than anything. And so I made a library for him, and it's nothing but his books and library shelves. Even there's 3 rows of library shelves where you can books on either side. So he had at least. An appraiser came one time and he had about 7,000 books. Woo! Yeah. But you could see some in behind us. I had to have bookcases put in every room when we moved in. And so this helped. It also helped solve the problem of what to do with all these books. And we had almost that many out at Fripp. But I had the library shelves and so forth. So hurry, my sister-in-law helped me, Pat's sister, get everything fixed up before he gets back into town. So I was able to sort of, surprise him with a library and his own writing space that's in another wing of the house, opposite from mine, and it was like a man cave, I guess.
Yes, yeah. And I know in the book that you basically said, "Hey, Pat didn't do much cooking. You did all the cooking, but he would only come in for special occasions."
Yeah, he was a fantastic cook, and loved to eat. As you look at him and tell, he always had struggled with his weight, and but The problem with one reason he was such a fantastic cook, I mean, liberal use of a lot of butter, cream, bacon fat, all the good stuff that we're not supposed to do. So to try to help him, with his health, some health concerns on that, I tried my best to cook healthy, and he couldn't do it. That was, at first, when we first married, we'd be cooking together, or it'd be he was going to do supper that evening and things like that, and eventually I would take over because he couldn't do it. He couldn't do healthy foods. Number one. Number two, he could not do small dishes. I felt like Goldilocks in more ways than one. When I moved into his house, in the kitchen, he had these huge platters, huge pasta bowls and things like that. Because there again, that large personality that he was, that's the way he cooked too. And he couldn't just do a few strips of bacon. He'd fry the whole thing of bacon, and things like that. So everything. I ended up but boy, he fought me. He finally got into more healthy habits.
Right.
Went toward the end, and I write about this toward the end of his life, about the last 3 or 4 years of his life. And bless his heart, he told his doctor, he said, okay, I quit drinking,
Right.
I quit eating unhealthy like I was doing. I got a personal trainer. I'm training every day. How does the Lord reward me? I get pancreatic cancer. I'm saying, healthy living will kill you faster than anything. And so that was his sense of humor. Well, he couldn't. He'd say this to his doctors that I could see him trying not to crack up.
Yeah.
But he was funny. He would say things like that, and you just couldn't have that dark sense of humor, and get all healthy. It'll kill you faster than anything.
And he was on the track of really becoming a more healthy eater and having a more healthier life. When did you notice the signs that something was off about your beloved Pat?
Yeah. We had, I say we, I tried not to have much to do with this, but his 70th birthday was coming up. And he had become friends and was working with, and quote, when I say working, that's quotes, with the young man who was the director of the University of South Carolina Press,
Right.
Jonathan Howe. And Jonathan is now the director of the Literary Center, Pat Conroy Literary Center, which, would please Pat immensely, because he thought Jonathan just was a wonderful editor and just read, he could talk books with someone he could really talk books with and so forth. And he and Jonathan were publishing these local, mostly, not all, but mostly local writers that had, for whatever various reasons, were not publishing with some of the major. So they were filling this great need with this imprint called Story River Books, I believe. Yeah, Story River. I was trying to say storybooks, but that one, Story River Books. So Jonathan got it in his mind, and he, I think, did this with Bonnie Hargrove, who's our performing arts director of the Performing Arts Center here, to have a big, celebration of Pat's 70th birthday. Yes. But sort of have it, in true celebration of of his birthday, as opposed to what you or I would have. This was going to be more like a literary festival, but it was going to be focused on Pat's works. So it was a wonderful weekend, and they brought his previous publishers and editors in, and some of the actors who had been in his movies to speak, and they showed a couple of the movies, and so it was a whole weekend celebration. And Pat, he complained about, oh my God, I don't want to do this. I'm going to kill Jonathan, for planning this, blah blah blah. And he was being sincere too. I don't think he was just being, just modestly saying, oh shucks, I don't want to do it. I want to do it. But he ended up enjoying it so much. So when his health began to decline shortly afterward, I certainly noticed, and understandably, I can't really look back and kick myself so much now, because I just thought he was exhausted from such a weekend that's so emotionally fraught too, because he had all these people from his past, like I say, past editors, these young men who had played him, the main character that was based on him. Michael O'Keefe, who played the Pat character in The Great Santini, was there, and Michael O'Keefe, and then David Keith. That doesn't sound right when I say it, but I think that was his name, who played the Pat character in The Lords of Discipline, and others involved in all these parts of his life.
Right.
It brought back people from those different times in his life. So it was an emotionally exhausting weekend. And it was shortly after that was his birthday. This was the end. It was the last weekend in October. So the next thing coming up was Thanksgiving, and we had gone away to the mountains for Thanksgiving with friends, as we had been doing for several years. And his health, certainly he was having back problems. There again, he had back surgery before I met him in the early 90s, and he had problems, as most people who have had back surgery, would continue to have problems with it throughout their lives. And so, he was really having a lot of back pain, which of course is a classic symptom of pancreatic cancer. But no one ever thought about that. Even at first, when he went to doctor, and I knew also, Quintin, that something was wrong. After Christmas, we got through the holidays, and he was not eating well. But I knew something was wrong when I didn't have to drag him to the doctor, kicking and screaming. I don't know if you're like that. Most men, are not very compliant with their doctors, and I don't want to go either. I'm usually on my deathbed when I drag myself to a doctor. So it wasn't that different, except I was beginning to see, he's not just tired. Something's going on, and I, because of the healthier eating, and not just, it wasn't just been in the last few months. It'd been the last 3 or 4 years that he wasn't drinking heavily and all like he had been before. I would have immediately assumed that, but since he wasn't doing all that, I I, I was, fearful that something else may be going on. But he looked so good. Yeah, as we do. I think when we exercise and we're doing better, and people that hadn't seen him for a long time, when they came to the 70th birthday, it was, oh my God, they would say to me, "Pat, you must be taking good care of him," which of course nobody took care of me. He wouldn't let you. But because he looks so good, he's lost so much weight. He just looks, his complexion had cleared up. And so he didn't look sick. He looked healthier than he had in years. So it was really a blow, because he got really sick in January. He pretty much lived 6 weeks after his diagnosis.
And how were you able to be so strong for him and the rest of his family and your family and yourself?
Yeah, I think what we all do in those situations is you don't think about that at the time. I look back now, some of my behavior seemed a little bizarre even to me. And not in any sort of martyr sense or anything like that. I don't mean that, but I couldn't stand to be out of the hospital room. If I would go get something to eat, I would, and I was there all the time. I must have gotten on his nerves terribly bad, because when I'm sick, I don't want anybody, hovering over me. Oh, you okay, and all that kind of stuff. I don't like that. But now I look back on it and think it was somehow. I mean, I knew without knowing, without it was like those were the last times we were going to be able to spend together. So I felt like I just had to be with him all the time, maybe. But I did also instinctively know that I had to take care of myself. That bad days were coming. I had lost my sister just 3 years previously, and she and I were extremely close. She was my sister and my best friend. So she had died in 2013, the first of the year, and then so Pat's getting sick exactly, almost at the very same time, 3 years later. Like they say, it was deja vu all over again, because she lived in Alabama. I had to travel, up there to see her, spend time with her. But with Pat, it was right there. So I certainly knew that things were going to get worse. And Pat has four daughters, and they were coming in, as much as they were able to do, because they all had careers, young families, and so forth. And so I did feel like I, sort of needed to be strong for them. And I most of the time, I just tried not to let myself fall apart. I certainly didn't do that around
Right.
Pat,
Right.
because it's hard enough. I mean, I know with my sister, I had done the same thing. I thought, if I fall apart, she's going to, and I can't. So kind of, I guess, did the same So, I mean, we all do what we have to do at the time.
And I know you were traveling from Jacksonville to Atlanta, and even over here to MUFC for to pat them, for the doctor checkups. And apparently, he couldn't even hold down smoothies when he was getting close to death. Unfortunately,
Quintin, it's terrible disease. It's anytime I still read things, I get things from the pancreatic, the national organization, and just hope and pray every time I read about any new advancement.
yes.
That can do things to help eradicate that, because it's just such a, I mean, not, of course, cancer so difficult, any form that you have, but I think pancreatic is extremely difficult, that not being able to hold down anything. And then what made me just really feel so horrible for him is the back pain that's associated with it, because when you're sick, what you want to, you need to lie down, you've got to lie down, you've got to be reclining and so forth, and when you're in extreme, excruciating pain from back, and you can't even get comfortable that way, then it's just a cruel and really awful thing, and have to watch someone you love go through that. It's so difficult.
How did you, Cassandra, unfortunately had to prepare for the worst towards Pat Conroy's death?
Mm-hmm. I guess I do have a strong faith, and I knew that he was in God's hands then, and but that's still hard. It's still hard to let go and let God take this person. But I think that was, I felt that I was in God's hands as well, that His comforting spirit was with me through this, and then had wonderful support from friends and family, of course, but Pat had wonderful friends and his supporters, and just was uplifted in so many ways, just held up on this love. I wrote about the final days, which was almost like a vigil, where we had people would come in, almost take turns without anything planned. It wasn't like you go over there for a while, I'll go for a few hours, or blah blah. As far as I know, I mean, maybe some of the friends got together and did that, and I didn't know about it. There was always someone in the room, and in the last days when he came back from the hospital, he lived 3 days after we brought him home on the hospice. The hospice people were so wonderful, and so it was, that those kinds of things will get you through. That's the only thing that can, get you through these things.
What is that one thing that you wish you could have done with Pat before, unfortunately he passed away?
Goodness. I think we all do this. I know I did this with my sister, in that I read the literature about the hospice provides, and I wish now that I had talked with him about more how he felt about the journey he was about to go on, because we had talked about that before. Pat was a very spiritual person.
Good.
He would joke and say, he was a recovering Catholic, and things like this. But he had been an altar boy, so he had attended until he moved to Beaufort. He had always, had strong religious upbringing, and had been to Catholic schools, his whole life. So he was very a person of faith and a spiritual person. And we talked a little bit, but you asked me what I wish that we could have done together more before he crossed over. And I would like to have been able to say one thing I kept saying to him, but not, I would say it more to myself than to him, would be, I'm so sorry this happened to you. I'm so very sorry. Because, you want the other person to feel like they can talk about what they're going through.
Yes.
When you're at that point in your life when you finally come to the end of which we're all going to be there. All going to be there one day. And like I say, you read the literature and it says you let people talk, in a way that they're comfortable talking. Don't try to force them to say, don't try to drag it out of them or make them have a conversation they're not ready to have. But there are always regrets, and I wish that I really wish that I had been able to say more, tell me how you're feeling about this. Because when he would do it in a joking way. Right. Because that was Pat.
Yes.
that was, Quintin, can you imagine? He would be in the hospital room and somebody would come in and Pat would say, come on in, you better see me while you can because I'm dying. Oh. And he was like, ooh. Yes. But that was Pat. Yeah. It was just, So that was how he dealt with it. We had a few, more personal conversations, but I wish we'd had more.
And I know when he was in the hospital room, he was joking that, I believe to you, that he'd already died yesterday.
Yeah, I don't think he was joking about that. That was a strange kind of thing, and he was not on at that point. He was not on the the hospice. Once you, especially in the kind of pain he was in, would be on stronger medication. Right. But he was not at that point, and that was, and I still, maybe that's something else I could add to what I wish we had talked about before it was too late. He told me one time, but the way he said it is that he said I died, and I died yesterday, and it was, no, I didn't know that because I'm talking to you. And I didn't quite know how, except later and thinking about it, I thought, was he saying that he died to this life, and he's and he's preparing himself to
Yeah.
enter the life beyond. And he was a believer that, as something that we shared and talked about in a life beyond this one. That the way I say it is we cross over from this life into another life, and so maybe that was what he meant by that, but it was because it wasn't drug induced that he was talking out of his head or anything like that.
Right.
It was happened. It was, he seemed very lucid, and so I think that's what he meant.
Whew. Well, this was I thoroughly enjoyed this, and I'm going to finish reading the book when I have some more time. But God, Cassandra King Conroy, thank you so much for your time, and again, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Yeah, that was really, really good. Thank you so